Welcome to another episode of Chax Chat. Join Chad Chilius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Chax Chat podcast. My name is Dax Castro. I am one of the accessibility wizards here at Chax Training and Consulting. And my guest today is Rob Underwood, one of our senior trainers at Chax. Rob, welcome to the program, man.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me on, Dax. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, you know, Rob, Chad's taking a break today, and we thought we'd have you on as one of our senior trainers to talk about a topic that I think is pretty important that a lot of people overlook when they're thinking about accessibility projects. And that really is the file management and workflow of a project that includes accessibility, right? So what I'm talking about, just to give our listeners a little bit of background, is that often we know that people will say, oh, I'm going to design this file and then I'm going to make it accessible, right? And you've worked through so many files where that's been a huge struggle, right?
Right. Well, you know, and what we always say around here is that we should design with accessibility in mind, but that while that is the perfect thing that we'd like to do, we very often get files that we have to fix. So it's right. Doing it after the fact, and it's taking on someone else's work and then trying to remediate it.
Well, and talk about how much, you know, that definitely takes a different amount of time than it does if you build accessibility in along the way, right? So, you know, would you say, could you give me a ballpark of how much time you think that added to one of your projects if they had done it at the end versus, or you doing it at the end versus them kind of thinking about it along the way?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and a lot of it depends on the size of a document. You know, we handle all kinds of documents here, whether it's a one-pager, it's a magazine, and everything in between, right? So, you know, to put a time on it.
Or even a percentage of time.
2 hours.
Yeah, because sometimes it's as simple as changing a color in the color palette, right? So like in InDesign, right? If you've got a green that they've used that may be too light, that needs to be darkened, it's if they've designed the file correctly, it's easy enough to go into the swatch library and modify that swatch color to be more accessible. And if they've used styles and all of that along the way, then it even makes it more easy to make all those changes happen globally. But sometimes they don't use styles, and their color, they might have 3 different tints of the same green because they weren't really being clear about what their brand colors were. And that just adds another layer of complexity, right?
Of course, yeah. I mean, and that's just talking about color alone. I think what you really helped me out with when, you know, as we've done all this document remediation here at Chax, is kind of compartmentalizing it into steps. Whether it's starting with the file name and, you know, put it in thinking about metadata and things like hyperlinks. That's kind of where I like to start, is kind of with, you know, the low hanging fruit.
Sure. And
then, you know, based on what the topic of this conversation, it's kind of breaking the steps down into things like headings and structure. Okay. Structure actually takes a lot more time than people would think.
Right.
Because in the situation that we're talking about here, when we have to look at someone else's work who wasn't thinking about accessibility, it's the structure that takes the most time. It's literally taking it apart and putting it back together so that you can add accessibility to it because it just wasn't thought of at the beginning. You know?
Well, you know, structure is such an important part. And often many people are working on, or multiple people are working on the same document. I mean, I know I've had experiences where I've opened an InDesign document and you can clearly tell that one person worked on the first 20 pages and somebody else worked on the last half of the document, because you start assigning heading structure, heading level 1, heading level 2, everything seems to be going according to plan. And then you get to the second half and it's a different structure. And
Yes.
where you were using a heading style consistently across the board in the beginning, now you've got to go back and rethink it because the second part of the document maybe doesn't follow that same structure. And you and I both know that a heading can look different and still be a heading level 1 or a heading level 2. But sometimes the organizational structure of the document varies. And so people will go from a heading level 1 to a heading level 3. And you're like, yeah, but I can make it a heading level 2 in the
Yes.
export to PDF, but visually for that person, there's visual accessibility that goes along with this, that it's not just about tags and tags tree, but as a sighted person, I want to be able to logically follow with my eyes kind of the organizational structure of the document.
Yeah, that brings up a good point because I think, in the teams that I've worked on, people understand headings differently.
Right.
I think when people start asking, why can't I have 20 headings? They're not really getting the point.
Well, can you tell for our audience, what is the main point of headings, right? What should they be using headings for?
Well, I think when people use headings, they have to understand how a person is going to navigate that document. And so there has to be kind of a parent-child relationship between these headings. They have to be related, right? So that if I'm looking at that top heading, whether it's the name, it's, this is what the document is about. Now I go down to the next thing. Maybe it's the table of contents. So that's not on the same level as the heading of the document. Now you get an H2.
Sure.
Now we go to the next page, and now we're talking about the first topic. So that takes on an H2. And then we've got headings underneath that. And that's what helps a person who uses assistive technology navigate a document.
Right. No, I agree with that 100%. And not even just people who use assistive technology, but also people who are visual readers, right? For me, as a person with ADHD, I get distracted a lot as I'm reading a document. And when you have a very consistent heading structure and a very consistent layout, all your headings are left justified and you've got consistent spacing and everything is predictable, it makes it much easier for someone to read and understand the document, just as it is for someone using assistive technology who can press that H key and move from heading to heading to heading or tag to tag to tag. And I think that structure is really important. And it's not the designer's responsibility to build that structure in. It's the writer. It is the copywriter. And when they don't think about writing in that way, then you put all that responsibility on the designer to try to have to pull all that out. And they're already one foot, one hand tied behind their back.
The one thing that you told me, Dax, that really made it all click was you said, when you were in middle school and you had to put together that TOC, that's the thing that you told me that really made my mind, it let me wrap my mind around what we were doing. Because I remember making those TOC before we even did the paper. You had to make that TOC first, and that's what they were trying to teach us. And that's exactly what the navigation should look like within a document. Right.
Well, and if we're talking about the structure of the document or the steps that I would take, right? So you talked about kind of breaking it into these different areas, right? So the first one is the metadata of the document. Then the second one is the headings, right? For me, I start with the color. I really think about what's my color palette? What combinations am I using? In fact, we made a script that we offer in some of our classes that is called the color contrast validator. What it does is it takes all of the colors in my color palette, in my color palette, and I compare one color to another to figure out what combinations are accessible or not. So what can I use for my heading level 1 for my large text or my regular text? How light of a gray or dark gray can I go? All of those things, getting all that set up so that as I design the document, I have a very clear picture on what my color scheme is. And I know that I don't have to go back and redesign a bunch of that. And then I love being able to use the CC libraries, right? And we here at Chax, we use the CC libraries all the time, right?
Yeah. And I think, two things to add to color is I would say, if you're going to make, and we're talking about, kind of after the fact, we're fixing documents later on in the process, is to make those solutions globally. So if you find
Right.
that green and you've got 100 more documents, you know that green is going to translate over to this new green. And to make those swatches panels or save those swatch libraries, and share them with everyone that's working on the document, and start saying, okay, look, start building the rules around how everything's going to change out. And also make sure that everyone on the team knows how to do a fine change, because
Sure.
those fine changes, I'll tell you, it was so rewarding when we fixed all the color. We thought about all the colors, how we're going to switch them out. And then in that, I know we kind of jumped from metadata into color, but there is kind of a crossover there, because what I like to think about metadata is what automated things or fine change. I like to include all my fine changes right at the beginning. So
Sure.
if someone did use 40% black for this small text that's in the back, or some legalese, and I need to convert that from 40 to 80% black, then I will do that right at the beginning. And for all of the colors, to be
Sure.
able to use fine change. Actually, I guess InDesign doesn't have global color like Illustrator does.
Well, for sure it does. So that's the CC library. So your color palette, right? So you've got a series of swatches in your color palette. And if I see that, like when we did our rebranding, right? So we went from the Chax pink to the Chax red. All I have to do is literally delete that swatch out of the color palette.
Yes.
And it'll say, hey, you took this color away. What color do you want me to use? And I'm like, hey, I got you. Chax red. And so I would, and that's where the CC library really comes into play. If listeners, if you have not used the Adobe Creative Cloud library feature inside InDesign and Photoshop and Illustrator, it goes across all the different platforms. It really is a powerful tool, because you and we've used this many times. We'll set up a client folder, and then here are the approved colors, because so many times we often use the color contrast analyzer, and we'll say, oh, that green's not quite accessible. So we'll drag the slider a little darker to make it more accessible. We'll grab that color and paste it in. But who's to say the color you pick and the color I pick are the same color across all the documents? And that's where that CC library really can be beneficial, because then we can have a meeting and say, okay, when we're going from light gray, 40% gray, because we've seen that sometimes 40 or 50% gray, and we know that it could be 70 or 80 or 85% gray and pass. We want to decide what that color is, and then create a swatch and save it in the swatch library, so that all of us, everybody on the team, can reuse that color and know reliably that that's the color that's going to be globally replaced.
And I think what people need to realize around, these new libraries that are offered through Adobe is that, in the past, you could create a library. I could create a library on my computer, and I could share it with you, could share it with everyone on the team. But it became their library that existed on their computer.
Okay,
So by using the new Creative Cloud libraries, you're essentially making a one source of truth that everyone accesses, so that everyone doesn't have another copy that they're adding to and changing. By introducing the Creative Cloud library, I mean, there it is. There's your source of truth for everyone.
Right. Well, you have an owner. And one of the things that people might not be aware of, that once you send someone an invite to a library, you have to actually open your Creative Cloud app on your computer and look for the little bell in the right-hand corner of the screen to see that invite. Right? It's not just here's your email address and invite gets automatically sent. They got it. And when they open up InDesign the next time, it's just going to be there. You've got to purposely open your Creative Cloud library, that app, and then look for those invites. It was a little, it was weird, because I was like, hey, I'm inviting you. It says that you're invited. And they're like, I'm not getting anything. I don't see anything. And then we realized, hey, you've got to go into your Creative Cloud app and then actually look at the notifications and see that I've request or given you access and then accept it. So that's something to think about. You know, we've talked about metadata, we've talked about structure, we've talked about color. One of the other things I like to talk about is planning for alternate formats, because we do a lot of data visualizations, bar charts and line graphs and things like that, right? And what we know is that often the way that it's presented in the document can either be really easy to make accessible, 2 bars and a couple of values. You just select it, right click and hit edit object export settings. And then you can go into those object export settings and add some alt text. But when it's more complex, and maybe that it would be better served as a table, thinking about, maybe I want this on the web as an alternate format, or maybe I want this at the end of the document as an expanded description. Those are hard things to do when you think about them at the end of your design process rather than as you're going, right?
Well, I think one point I'd like to bring up is that everyone designs differently.
Sure.
So sometimes, you know, in a perfect world, everyone would be making all of these in Illustrator and then bringing them into InDesign, where they could have alt text applied to them. But what we often see is that some of these are built in InDesign. So you've got tables or charts or bar graphs where there is live text. And I think there's value in, you know, even though I said it was a perfect world with if they were all Illustrator files, sometimes it's not. Because sometimes the reader experience, if you have those words on the page, the reader experience is actually better than alternative text.
Well, the one caveat to that is we see bar charts and line graphs created in InDesign, and they're fine, except for you have to remember that every piece of text can only be used one time. There is a single tag for a single piece of text. And if I've got 2 series of data, I can't say spring 2024 the value is 100. Spring 2025, the value is this, because spring can't be reused over and over and over again. It can only be used once. So thinking about some of that as you go really is important to think about that, the way that those things are going to be used. When it's a single piece of data and you can put them all in order using the articles panel. And for those of you listening, the articles panel is how you set the tag order in your document. If you can manage that, that's great. But I think one of the things that we see a lot of is people add these overlays to a bar chart or a line graph or a pie graph where it's some little box with text in it. And when it talks about some little anecdotal fact about that object. And when you do all of that in Illustrator, that becomes a barrier, because now you've got one graphic that contains text and the data visualization. So it's all a problem. That's talking about your point of making some of those items live text inside InDesign is the benefit. Having your line graph or bar chart as a graphic and then these overlay blocks of text as text helps make the whole process go a lot smoother, right?
Yeah. And actually, now that I have your attention, Dax, I would love to ask you this one. So
sure.
So sometimes you'll have like a pie chart or there'll be some graph and maybe it doesn't even have a legend on it.
Yep.
But you're looking at it and you say, you know what, this would be great if it was just in a table. It would be so much better to convey all this information. And so sometimes we have used that as a fix where we create a table and we throw it behind the graphic.
Sure.
But I would love to know your honest opinion. Do you think that's a good user experience? Or what do you actually think about hiding things? Is that not a good thing? Or?
Well, you know, I've changed my opinion over time. So I used to say, this is the way we do it. We're going to, when it's too complex, we're going to put a table behind this graphic. And what I've realized over time is, as doing this, as long as I've been doing it, is that it's not just about blind people and screen readers. That there are lots of people with cognitive disabilities who still use assistive technology. And when you're looking at a pie graph, but you're seeing the little purple outlines of the table, this hidden table behind that graphic, it can create a really disjointed user experience. The better experience would be to have that table after the pie chart visually for everyone, or have an appendix section in the back that has a link. So underneath your pie chart, you've got accessible alternative table. And that link takes you to the end of the document where you've got a series of tables for everyone. Because remember, accessibility is really about access to the data. And some people prefer the pie chart, others prefer the table. And if you can give both, that's ticking off all the boxes, right?
That actually brings up a good point that, since I should actually say that I do edit all of the Chax podcasts. And so I do hear a lot of these things firsthand. And the point that Chad brought up recently is that I think that the table experience is better for a non-sighted user than it is for a sighted user. I mean, to actually hear, okay, here's that value of 25 that's related to potatoes that are from Idaho, and to hear that all at once instead of, I'm in the middle of the page, I can't see the top header, I can't see the row header, and I think that's a valid point, that it's actually a better experience.
Well, and what you're talking about for our listeners is sometimes you have a table that spans multiple pages. And when those long, big tables span multiple pages, we don't often get to see the column or row headers that are associated with that data cell. And as a screen reader user, especially if I'm using JAWS, because in JAWS, there's a keyboard combination, which is Control-Alt, the number pad 5, that says, read me all of the headers that are associated with the cell I'm in. That shortcut key does not exist inside NVDA. NVDA, as you move away from a cell or into a cell, it will read the value that changed, only the value that changed. So you won't hear the row header that you're in if you just move right. You'll only hear the column header. So I would even go a step further and say, in JAWS, inside a table, you have the most comprehensive user experience, because at any time you can say, read all my data points, and it's going to read all the associated data along header cells along with that cell. So going back to your point, I think that a table can be more accessible, but I know that people process data differently. And I was at CSUN, the CSU Northridge Assistive Technology Conference, attending a data visualization, discussion board. And one of the people who was in that board is blind, and said, look, if you give me a table with 50 columns and 50 rows and expect me to get the same thing out of it that you got out of looking at that bar chart showing the trend or the outlier or whatever the key point is, you're mistaken. It's hard for me to come. So I think from a navigation point, I agree with you. But from a trend point, I think it's much harder. And that's where table summaries come into play, right, Rob?
That's right. And table summaries can only be done in Acrobat. Is that right?
Yeah, it is the worst. Adobe, if you're listening, give us the ability to do table summaries inside Adobe InDesign. Also, give us the ability to set a table summary with the tags tree. Let me right click on the table tag and go into edit table summary. Don't make me open the read order tool, select the table, right click, go to table summary, and then edit it. That's such a convoluted way to get to what really is a very important aspect of complex tables.
Actually, while we're on tables, Dax, I would just like to point out, this is kind of a touchback on structure, but I'd say the biggest challenge that we had with a lot of the documents that we've had across all different customers is people designing with layout tables. So you've got the headshot, you've got the person's their name, their write-up, and then as I understand that a table makes everything completely aligned. If you use it as that, I understand why someone would use it as a tool, but it is such a blocker that we have to rebuild the whole entire thing. So if there's any one message to people listening to the podcast, it's I would not use tables in that manner. There are 10 other ways you could make things more accurate, starting with the alignment panel in InDesign, or guides, just using guides and rulers. There's hundreds of ways to do it. And though tables would seem logical, they all have to be rebuilt.
Well, not all, and I'll push back a bit. So here's the way you decide whether or not you should or can use a table as a layout table. Okay. A table is supposed to be the alignment of columns and rows, the data comparing one item to another. And when you have, I'll take your headshot example. In column 1, you have everyone's headshot. And in column 2, you have everyone's name, title, email address, and phone number, right? There's no barrier using a table for that kind of layout because the data moves left to right, top to bottom. There's no way for me to get confused as to, of course, you'd want to artifact the image, right? But so you really would end up with just really a single column of cells, but there's no way to confuse that data. However, if I made a 3-column table, or maybe a 6-column table, and the first 2 columns were the picture and the name, and then the next column was the picture and the name, and then the next column was the picture and the name, and I'm building a 3-column grid of all of these people information, now it is a barrier. Now, because I don't have association between one element and another, reading left to right doesn't make sense anymore. That becomes the barrier. So you have to ask yourself, as I read a table left to right, top to bottom, does it still make sense? If it still makes sense, then there's not really a barrier. If it can be confusing, or you could misconstrue what information belongs with next to, an office name and then the address, right? If it was office name, address, office name, address, office name, address in each one of those columns, it's very easy to mistake the wrong address for the wrong office, right? And so that's where the barrier comes into play. So ask yourself, left to right, top to bottom, does it read okay? And if it reads okay, then while not preferred to be a table, there's not a barrier as a table.
Now, you talked about if we just had 2 columns. And so in the left column, it was just the images, and we could artifact them.
Yep.
However, if we artifacted them, then wouldn't we have an empty column or empty cells?
Yeah, you'll have an empty cell. They're going to hear blank and then somebody's name, blank, somebody's name, blank, somebody's name. I still understand who the name is, right? And it's not a barrier. I'm not going to confuse one person's name for another. All that information is in one cell. Their entire contact information is in one cell. And at that point, once I hear blank and then the data, blank and the data, I'm like, okay, I get it. There's nothing in column 1. So I'm just going to hit the down arrow as I'm, control alt down arrow for column 2. And I'm just going to go cell to cell to cell to cell in a linear vertical fashion. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not great. I wouldn't prefer it, but it's not a barrier. Barriers happen. Things that we must change are different than things that we'd like to change. It's that good, better, best mentality, right?
Right.
A table that is a grid of images. Let's just say they're survey photos of a construction site, right? We would say, well, that's a layout table. You shouldn't do that.
Right.
My answer is, do they need to be in order? If they need to be in column order, and you've used the table to lay them out, that's a problem because tables read left to right, top to bottom. But if it doesn't matter what order they are in and you're just reading it because it's a grid, then who cares? It's not a barrier to have that information in that table. So it really is, we can spend a lot of time. I think the takeaway here is evaluate whether it's a barrier and then decide the amount of time it's going to take you and go, okay, is this a barrier? No. Okay. Fixing it. How making it better or best? how much time is that going to take? Because if it's going to take me 2 hours or an hour to undo this table and relay out everything, and the net benefit for the end user is just not hearing column 1, column 2, that's not a good use of my hour. I'd much rather be doing other things.
I will throw in one other tip that we found along the way. So again, back to that table, going back to that same one where you've got all the images in the left column and you got the write-ups column to the right. So one way to fix that would be, if you're going to artifact the images anyhow, then you could literally just get rid of that first column.
Yes.
But you'd still have to keep the image on the page for sighted people, of course, and for the layout to remain how it is. Yeah. So one shortcut that we found is that, so if you take, you got a headshot, you copy it or cut it, and then you go to your type tool, you go into that first cell and you paste it. Well, now it becomes like an inline graphic inside of that.
Yes, it's inside that table in that TD. Yeah.
And so if you go back to your selection tool and you select it and you copy it and you try to do a paste in place, it won't work because it can't remember. The only thing it remembers is the XY value of where it is inside of that cell.
That's a great tip. I see where you're going. This is awesome. Keep going.
So paste in place won't actually work. And if you just do a paste, it'll just, depending on how you're viewing your screen, it'll just throw it absolutely
somewhere.
anywhere.
Yeah. Right.
So here's the tip, is that you copy it. You zoom in 3 times. Sometimes you only have to do it once or twice, but 3 seems like the lucky number. You zoom in 3 times, so Command +++ or Control, and paste, and it'll go right back to where it was.
Sure.
So all you have to do is zoom, and you actually do get the paste in place.
Interesting. So I guess what I was thinking is that if it were me, I've got 2 columns, and somebody designed this with all the images in column 1. My first thought is I'm going to copy the image and then paste in place, knowing that it's not going to paste it in the table cell. It's just going to paste it on top of the table cell. And I'm going to do that for each of the images. And then I'm going to go back and delete all of column 1. Now what happened is effectively I have all the images exactly where they were in the table cells, but they're not in a cell anymore. I only have this 1 columns table that I can just move back over a little bit to the right once I've deleted that column. And now my decorative elements are decorative and my table can stay a single column of text, right? That's a good tip. That's awesome. So
thank you. And then you can artifact all those images.
Right. And that goes back to the point of, guys, artifact your headshots. If the person's information is right to the right of it, you don't need to say headshot of John Smith and then John Smith, blah, blah, blah. There's no reason that you need to have that there being tagged, unless there's some physical characteristic that you need to call out about that person. The headshot, it's really decorative. Just like the signature is decorative. When you have a wet signature and then you've got the person's name typed underneath, you don't need to hear John Smith, signature of John Smith, blah, blah, blah. It's redundant information. So go ahead.
Yeah, Dax, let me just do one more. I would just like to bring up my favorite tip for when I have to do articles and layers. Because as you know, in InDesign, you have to do both. You have to control the article order and the layer order, right?
Well, why? Explain that to our users as to why, if they were not aware.
Because you have the reading order, and then you have what's the other one called?
The tag order.
The tag order. And certain technologies use one set, while some other technologies use another set. So,
well, the reality is that 85% of the world uses the tag order, which is the articles panel. And then older
EDA.
Right. And then older assistive technology, Adobe Read Aloud, Text Help Read and Write, Dragon Naturally Speaking, any of those other engines might use the layer order or the reading order panel. And that is set by what you were just saying, the layers. And so if you're trying to maximize accessibility for all screen readers, then setting them both is really part of your workflow. So go ahead. Yeah.
So I came up with something that I thought was pretty clever, and I'd like to just share with everyone, because I know there's a lot of, I guess no one likes to manually fix the order of everything, right? So
sure.
The nature of the layers panel is that you're looking at your document and you're dragging things into the correct order from the bottom up. And then the nature of the articles panel is that you're dragging things in to create your article structure, and that's from the top down.
Yep.
Right? So I devised a way that I could do both at the same time.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Are you interested now? All right. So the way that I did that is that, first of all, I'm looking at the layers panel and I'm dragging things, I'm dragging the top stuff to the bottom. And I'm like, wait, there's got to be a shortcut here for what I'm doing. And so the shortcut is send to back. So you start with your very first object. And so, as you know, send to back is shift, command, and left bracket. Now that's a lot of fingers right there, right?
Right.
So I change mine to command 1 because I use command 0, fit to window, plus and minus. I don't use command 1 and 2. So I set up command 1 as send to back. So I start with my first object on the page and I do a command 1. And then I go to my next object and I do a command 1. And as it keeps bringing things up, well, think about what's happening. It keeps stacking things so that your topmost item ends up at the bottom.
Right.
So that solves half of the equation. The other half of the equation is that I want to do articles at the same time. So you set up that shortcut of add to article, which I'll give a command 2 shortcut to. Mm-hmm. So now you start with your top object and you select it in InDesign. You do a command 1, command 2. Next object, command 1, command 2. Next object. And you go through the entire document. And with those 2 shortcuts, you set up both layers and articles at the same time.
Dude, I am blown away. I have been using InDesign for many, many years. And I tell this to people all the time. You never stop learning, right? It's never stop learning. True. And I go to conference after conference listening to every time I walk away with something new and unique. And while on the surface, this seems very simple, just set up some shortcuts, the workflow in which you do it makes it so much easier and so much faster to be able to add things to the layers and articles panel at the same time that I'm sure our listeners are going to be thrilled. In fact, if you thought that was a great tip, I want you to leave a comment either on the LinkedIn post that this was announced on or on the YouTube channel. You can go to our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel is at A11Y. So if you go to YouTube, they have these new at symbol names for channels, or you can just look up Chax Chat and you'll find us. Rob, this has been amazing. I want to end with just one final note for everyone, which is understanding the roles and responsibilities of the different people that are involved in a file. Many of our designers are single designers. They're just the only person. They are content creator, designer, editor, proofer, all of it.
Pack checker.
Yes. But in a lot of other organizations, there are people who write the copy. And then there's somebody else who writes the alt text and somebody else who creates the graphics. And there's all these different teams, making sure that those people have all the training they need to understand the little bit of best practices, how to write accessibly, how to think about heading structure. That's all the person who's writing copy needs to understand. They don't need to know tags or tag structure. The person doing the graphic design for the charts and graphs, they need to understand color contrast and use of color alone. Knowing the little bits that you need to know to do your job well makes all of it work well together as a well-oiled machine. Not everyone has to know everything there is to know about accessibility in order to create an accessible document as a group. So I hope that helps give people some good information. Rob, it's been wonderful having you on the podcast today. I really appreciate our time. And thank you so much for carving some time out of your schedule to be here with us.
Dax, thank you so much for having me. love the podcast, and you guys do some great work here. So love it.
Awesome. Well, that's another podcast. Join us again in 2 weeks where Chad and I, or whoever our guest might be, will unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.